Good morning and welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. It's sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care, Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care, now accepting residents. Call for a tour at 360-271-2530 to experience Fieldstone's beautiful appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you our political guru, David Harrison. Good morning, David.
Good morning. Looking forward to our talk today. When if you go back over the months that we've talked, obviously there's some recurring themes, but my argument right now would be some things that have happened regularly that make this month and this week dramatically different than some things that we've talked about before. So that's what I'll be raising with you. So as usual, we'll do 3 sections, so give us a chance to pause. The first section, and what's most monumentally different, has to do with Merrick Garland's talk, Joe Biden's talk from the Capitol, where we stand with regard to the insurrection and the Congressional Investigative Committee, and whether there'll be charges against Donald Trump. The second element that I want to raise after we get done with that is the related issue of proposed changes in January to the filibuster law, what's happening on the Voting Rights Acts, the various things that are out there, and what is happening on Build Back Better. They're all related, of course, because they all have to do with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema and the progressives, the liberals, 50 votes and 60 votes. And there's some new developments there that we'll take up. And then lastly, we get to revisit the pandemic and think about what the Omicron has to do with all of us. And unfortunately, we should talk about what it has to do, the meaning it has for us politically. So that's my idea. As always, you can tell me when I'm wrong, but I'm excited about raising these things. People in administration, not so much in Trump's administration, where the planning was really based upon the president's whim, but the president, his vice president, his chief of staff, his attorney general, and such actually talk to each other and plan. And the relationship between Merrick Garland's summary of where he stands on the insurrection and the anniversary of the insurrection and Joe Biden's talk from the Capitol on the insurrection and members of Congress standing outside on the steps with lighted candles. That was an intent. That's all a plan. And if you're thinking that Democrats are floundering, it actually was a pretty good plan. Biden still has the weaknesses of being our age. If Joe Biden would have pulled that off much better if he was 60, but it still was a great talk. And he laid out, I think, quite clearly this con thing that Trump's doing. So not every American realizes that the Republicans are challenging ballots that they won on. And so they're in states that candidates won, their congressional candidates, they're saying on those same ballots that their congressional candidates got the appropriate totals, but that somehow Donald Trump is missing votes. I don't know how that would conceivably work, but at any rate, Joe Biden got a lot of great stuff in there about Donald Trump, and that will draw Donald Trump into a further discussion on these matters. Why didn't Joe Biden do that before? Because he needs to be seen as governing. If he had spent last year saying, no, you're wrong, I won, you lost, you're a loser, that would not have gone well for the 19, 17, whatever it was, Republican senatorial votes we got on the infrastructure bill and it wouldn't have gone so well in the media. It's true that Joe Biden was hoping that an occasional Republican would vouch for his victory, and that's happened. But in any normal times, most of that party would have said the election is over and Joe Biden's the victor. It's a sign of what fear there is still in that party toward Donald Trump, that nothing has happened like that. At any rate, so Joe Biden's talk was finally timed to let their investigative committee get some stuff out first, including the possibility that for 3 hours and 47 seconds, Trump wound and rewound pictures of people assaulting policemen and chortled while America was being under attack, and that the delay in calling the National Guard was intentional, and that everybody from his daughter to Mark Meadows to Sean Hannity was pleading with him to stop. And so that's what they're getting out. So Joe Biden is opening up a new front in his presidency, having to do with attacks on what Donald Trump is doing to our democracy with the big lie. And that's intentional. He would be doing it even if his polling was a little bit better. He was waiting to do it for a reason, and the investigative committee gives him cover to do it now. With regard to Merrick Garland, his audience is different. Merrick Garland's key phrase in that whole talk is that he'll go wherever the evidence takes him. That's a signal to the judicial community that if their evidence is there to charge Trump with a role in starting the insurrection, that Merrick Garland, will do it. And the reason why Merrick Garland isn't saying that every day is, first, it's not the way that attorney generals are supposed to behave. They're supposed to evaluate the evidence and let the evidence talk, as he mentioned the other day, as much as progressives like Lawrence Tribe wishes he would talk all the time. Maybe Bill Barr talked too much, but Merrick Garland's not going to. One of the reasons he's not going to is he has a different audience, and there's only 9 of them. If Donald Trump or Meadows or Steve Bannon or anybody ever gets criminally charged for a role in January 6th, there will be action on those charges and appeals all the way up. Again, as you know, the appeals on whether Trump could hide his income tax files from the district attorney in the Southern District of New York was not successful. The Supreme Court ruled is allowed the DA and the grand jury to see those. So Trump would appeal whatever happens as a criminal charge. And Merrick Garland is behaving in such a manner as John Roberts would like him to behave. Wherever the votes are on the court, that's what he's doing. Meanwhile, the Congressional Committee for January 6th is behaving like you would expect them to behave, in that they have subpoena power, which the courts will uphold. There'll be arguments over executive privilege and this and that, but for the most part, the people there subpoenaing either the subpoenas will be upheld and they'll be facing jail time, like Steve Bannon, who was not a White House staffer. He doesn't have he might have some minor claim with regard to conversations with Trump, I doubt it, but he doesn't have the protection he needs. So people will either be successfully subpoenaed and have to talk, or they'll face jail, or they'll want to be subpoenaed. There's not inconsiderable number of people, including White House aides, Stephanie Grisham for one, who don't mind being subpoenaed. Yeah. Then they'll say to the Trump world, sorry, I got subpoenaed. I'm going to have to say what I know about January 6th. And that's dribbling out now. And it's awful, awful, awful stuff. Makes you weep for America. It's not an incidental effort. It's a coup effort. Now, there are those who say that we're more susceptible in the coup, for a coup going in 2024. That's not true, because the presidency controls the federal machinery of power. It's much harder to have a coup if you're not president. And Trump was the president on June 6th, so January 6th. So at any rate, what the disclosures will be, whether or not Trump is culpable on a criminal charge, what the disclosures will be amazing and awful. So what this has to do with politics, as you know, is it gives us, if it plays out like Biden hopes it will, it gives us a little bit more juice for the congressional elections this year, and certainly for the presidential elections 2 years from now, should Trump run, which I do not believe he will. So it's good stuff. It's what you would want to have happen. You watched TV a year ago and we're weeping for our country. There's been 300 or so how many arrests already? And as Merrick Garland said, it's just the start. So let's stop there and see whether we're all thinking the same about the significance of these actions. And I'll answer any questions on this Garland, Biden, January 6th nexus.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. Tom?
Or you could just say, David, you're so right about that.
Well, David, I hope you're right.
Yeah.
I really am worried because it looks like nothing's happening. Those people have been indicted, but they're not, how many? I think there's only one person in jail. And
is that right?
They're
I don't
getting
think that's
hammered.
right.
Well, I could be wrong. First time for everything, right? Anyway, come on. Anyway, that concerns me because perception is reality, and what really worries me is the midterms. When we get into that midterm, and if it looks like things aren't happening, people aren't being punished. That's a great theme for the Republicans to beat on. So I worry about that.
So can you hear me, or do I have to be on screen? I'm checking how many people.
Oh, we can hear you, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tom, I agree with you, but my reading of this last week is the opposite, that we're seeing the progress that you've been wanting to see, and so I'm very heartened by both Trump, by both Biden. Okay, right now, I'm here to come back again.
I have a little computer problem there, dear.
No, I was just checking what he said.
Oh,
71 people have 71 people have been sentenced. I don't know how
Yes.
many of them are in jail.
Yeah.
Tom, you're absolutely right. My argument is a subset of yours, that we'd be crazy not to do something around now on January 6th, and what we've done in the last week shows that we're not crazy, and that we're making the signal from Merrick Garland is that there will be further charges. The signal from Joe Biden is he'll appeal to the 65 to 70% of Americans who think the insurrection was awful. And the signal from the committee is they're going to subpoena away. As you know, if we lose the House majority, they're done at the end of the year. So they're well aware of that timetable. So I agree with your worry, but not with your conclusion. I think this last week shows that we've got some juice. If you look at, I'm sure you did, if you look at the whole Merrick Garland thing, that thing is filled with signals that he's on
the case.
Yeah.
Sheila, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm really, it goes along with what you've just been saying, I know, but my concern is that nothing's going to happen, and you're going to have the Donald run again in 24 or whatever, and all the people, all those minions with him, and the places, I don't, what kinds of things can you see that can happen that just ain't going to happen?
Well, it's a big argument that Trump didn't want to win the first time around. And then, of course, his ego got in his way. Trump will be 78. And he doesn't like to work very hard. But I think it is true that that Biden has had a drop in his approval ratings, but Trump has not had an increase. So the problem with Trump is the way that he has, this was true before we won, and it's why we won with independence. The means that Donald has to keep his somewhat diminishing base is anathema to independence. The things he has to say and do, including the steal, independents don't like. They don't like the insurrection. They don't like stop the steal. And so his problem is to get the loyalty of his somewhat diminishing base. He's had to sacrifice appeal to independent voters. So if you were a risk-taking person, you'd want him to run, because the way the demographics are playing, the only way that Republicans can win national elections is to get significant numbers of independent voters. So I know you don't want to take that risk. You'd be happy to have him announce that he wasn't get a reoccurrence of his fallen arches and not be able to serve. But yeah, that I didn't say that our victory in 2024 is guaranteed. I said before on this screen, we've got to be seen by June of this year as getting us through the pandemic. The economy has to be strong. To me, how we respond about January 6th and the big lie is another part of our platform going forward. I don't think there's any chance Joe Biden's going to run. And my biggest concern is not that Donald Trump will, but that we don't have a clear candidate. I'm not turned off by Kamala Harris. I think she hasn't had a chance to be Kamala Harris, but I don't think it's self-evident that she's our candidate in 2024. And we need to win then. If we don't win then, a lot of the things we'll have done will get unraveled by executive order in 2024. Other questions? Yes.
I have a comment on one thing that I listened to Merrick Garland, and he was talking about it's frustrating that the bigger fish aren't being caught in this whole insurrection, because there is a lot of bigger fish that were really involved, and a lot of them are sitting in the halls of Congress. But I love what Merrick Garland says. We have to go with the lower level, the people that were, smashing the windows, spreading what on the walls, and desecrating the Capitol. We have to go over them first, because we are getting really good evidence from these people to catch the bigger fish.
And when you think about that, you have to show the crime before you show the conspiracy to lead people to commit the crime. So exactly. I think that that's absolutely the case. He said all that he can say, that he's going to go where the evidence takes him. As if you talk to 100 lawyers about what that means, it means that he's not unwilling to charge the president. Keep in mind that conspiracy charges to foment violence are complicated because we have the First Amendment. So it's not as easy as saying he told people to march on the Capitol. He didn't say march on the Capitol, break in and beat people up. So you got to have more than what he said on TV. So, but I think that case is being assembled. I think there's some calls from him to the alleged war room at the Willard Hotel on January 5th that they're investigating. I think Merrick Garland's going to have a case. I need to quickly mention that there's some other lawsuits. For those of you who read my blog, there's some other lawsuits that are interesting. The state district attorney of the Southern District of Manhattan impaneled the second grand jury now that we have turnover there, and Cyrus Vance Jr. has retired, but there's possible criminal charges for tax fraud there. And then the case in Georgia is still very much an option, where the district attorney for Fulton County may charge Trump in his calling of Raffensperger looking for votes, charge him with election fraud. So stay tuned.
Yep.
So we'll go on, if you want, to my second set of issues, unless there's another thought, concern, insight, or insult. Tom.
One more thought. The other thing that really is a concern is voter suppression. That's the other way they win, is by getting rid of votes or disallowing people to vote. It's even now it's rough. I believe it was Georgia where the black voters, areas that were primarily black, had to wait 6 or 8 times as long. The white voters were 6 minutes and the black voters were 48 minutes. That wasn't Georgia. Georgia was much worse. It was hours. But that's their main thrust. Change the rules, make it harder to vote, and that works.
Well, that's where we're heading in this talk. So now let's take up that and the related issues of the filibuster, the various voting rights acts, and what's going to happen with Build Back Better.
Oh, Cynthia had a quick, do you have something real quick, Cynthia?
Just really quick, and it could wait, but I'm taking lots of notes here, so I'm looking down. But by June, we need to be at a place where there's something happening with getting people being jailed or charged, and start seeing the results there. We need to see the economy really producing effectively by June. And the third thing you mentioned, I wanted to make sure I got all your points.
Yes, the three are the economy, management of COVID, and progress battling against Trump's lies. I've talked a lot on this show and in my blog about the other two. They're monumental success already on the economy.
Right.
And we'll go to the COVID for a minute, but one of the reasons why Rochelle Walensky did that 5-day rule on the Omicron is they didn't want to shut down the economy because, we've got 7 million new jobs.
Okay.
But let me say at the outset, being asked any question by Cynthia Schick is very daunting because I know her knowledge on these matters. So yes, think of it as 3 planks. Well, there's more planks than that. You want to be seen as a leader internationally. You want to have been seen as doing something on carbon. So there's a whole list of things that Biden wants to have on June 1st to make it easier for his congressional and senatorial candidates. But the big ones, the monumental ones, are certainly the economy and being seen as a leader on COVID because Trump ceded that territory, even though he was part of warp speed development of a vaccination. I think this argument that progressives and liberals need to see him making progress on Trump's lies and prosecuting and so forth. It doesn't matter to me whether he needs to do it because he intends to do it, and I'm heartened by that. I don't want show trials. I want successful trials, and I want Merrick Garland to be meticulous, and I am not worried that Joe Biden or Merrick Garland is afraid to bring charges. I think that's not true. And when people say it, Lawrence Tribe and others, it's not my belief. I don't agree with that.
Thank you.
Did I respond?
Yeah, and the whole reason for that is we'll get to that at the end, I hope, is what do we need to be doing on our critical path as actors? And I think this is all going to unfold as you continue.
Well, I would get David Harrison's blog, and every time he suggests 3 things, I would do them.
Yeah.
But I will underscore something. In my last blog, I talked about the Republican Accountability Project. A lot of us had a lot of hope for the Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project is having problems, personality problems, and I think they just need to get over the fact that they were once Republican aides, because it makes them snarkier than, I mean, I would go to great lengths to be snarky about Donald Trump, but when you offend the sensibilities of independent voters, then you're not helping. Where now comes the Republican Accountability Project, and they're just more strategic. And one thing we can do, if we can ever find a Republican who has any guts in this country, is thank them for having guts. And I'm sorry that it's Liz Cheney that does, and her record on things that we care about is not good, including not recognizing her own sister being gay, which is an outrage. But Liz Cheney has more guts than any other 1,000 Republicans added up. And she's going to show those guts all the way to November. So anyway, one of the things we can do, of course, is if we find a responsible Republican to support them. One time in my blog, we all wrote to Raffensperger for the same reason.
So then the real action is to get as many thousands of people as we know to get your blog.
There we go.
Okay.
I mean, that would change America. I think I better yield to Heather Cox Richardson, who I think has 1 million or so followers. So,
Great.
She should be more focused on. Well, it'd be a different blog if she was telling you. Certainly, the demographic imperative in America is huge, and the intentions of Latino organizers is amazing, and their work is outstanding. So whenever we find extra money, we just send it to Mi Familia Vota, because you could argue, you would argue that we wouldn't have won Arizona and Nevada without them, but you could argue that we wouldn't have won Georgia either, because they did a ton of work on Latino votes in Georgia. Back to where Tom was and voting rights. How are we doing for time? Am I running this now?
We can keep going.
What time is it now?
Let's see, it is 12:01, so we have a half
Okay,
hour.
so we're always done by 12:30. I'll go faster. There's 3 separate voting rights things being talked about all at the same time. The first is where Tom was. There's a suppression effort underway in the United States because the way that Republicans have decided that they might be able to win is decrease the number of African American and Latino voters. And so those are generate bald-faced efforts in Arizona, Texas, and Florida for sure, Georgia, to change how easy it is to vote. Let's remember that these are modest up against the numbers of voters we're talking about, but anything that discourages 50,000 voters is a lot. So let's not minimize them. And for those of us who follow this, Brennan Center follows it daily, and they're outstanding. And so is the ACLU. And anyway, let's keep in mind that this is not 1963. This is cherry picking things like picking out votes at Black churches and somebody all putting them in the box, or voting on Sunday afternoon after church, and they're picking things that they know that African-American voters like to do and decreasing the ability to do it. I think it's Texas where it's one drop-off ballot place for the county.
Yeah.
We had something like 20 million, 25 million more vote by mail votes this last election because of COVID. And for the most part, we've been able to preserve those vote by mail regulations. And for the most part, outside of Georgia and Arizona, the suppression efforts have not crept into our northern and Midwestern states. But vigilance is the price of liberty, and that's why we're trying to pass there's 3 voting rights acts. The broader Voting Rights Act that we're trying to, that's being blocked by the 60 vote filibuster rule, is to federalize elections more and to protect vote by mail and so forth. The John Lewis Act means to resurrect the voting rights law that we passed in the 60s that establishes new oversight of states when they take certain, especially suspect states, when they take certain actions. And then Mitch McConnell has proposed that there be some action on whatever the Voting Count Act is. There's a arcane law on how electoral votes are counted. So that's where we stand right now. We do not, so the dream of Democrats is that their 50 votes will carve out an exception to the filibuster and pass both the John Lewis Act and the broader Voting for All Act, or whatever it's called. They're not going to do that. Manchin is very interested in tweaking the filibuster, but he's not going to carve out an exception for voting rights. And we're going to be stuck trying to prove to America that the suppression underway is a miserable thing. Here's the good news. If you break down the filibuster and then you lose control of the Senate, Mitch McConnell is going to drive a stake through your heart and that of all other Democrats. So the idea that we're talking in January about eliminating a protection we might need in the following January, to me, is bizarre. I'm one of the Democrats who believes that the way to protect things that Biden has done is to not assume that we will always have 50 senators. As last I checked, we didn't get to 50 till January 5th of this year, last year, a year ago, because Warnock won and Ossoff in Georgia. We are trivializing the dangers of eliminating the filibuster. So news piece number 1 is I don't think they are going to carve out a piece of anything to on the filibuster to get us the Voting Rights Act that we need. So Tom Kilbane will be right that we're getting screwed in those, especially southern states, and so are voters in reprehensible ways. Now, there'll be some lawsuits, might be some paring back, but the things that have been to us and done to us in those states is not inconsequential. We can still win. They just made it a tad harder. What might happen on the filibuster then if they're not going to do what I just predicted they won't do? Manchin's interested in goosing the filibuster a little bit. He's interested in possibly a talking filibuster where you can only filibuster if you're up on the floor for as long as you're up. But then at the end of that, it would be subject to a vote, and that decreases the number of filibusters a little bit because it's annoying to other senators when people talk for 3 days. The other thing Manchin's interested in is giving special dimension to things that pass out of committee and not allowing one member to block the floor debate. That would help a bit. it still doesn't eliminate the filibuster, but those two real rules changes are promising, and he's talking to Republicans about them. So those would be helpful. So that's where we stand on the filibuster. My prediction is we're still not going to get a Voting Rights Act. We're going to set that up as an issue for this November. We're going to use it as an organizing issue in the South. And we're going to use our last 50th mansion vote to still get Build Back Better. The reason why Jayapal and others are treating Manchin still with great courtesy is they still think there's going to be a Manchin-Biden compromise for a couple $100 billion less, with a little less of the child tax credit. They think they still got that, and that's why they're kid-loving Manchin. They still think in January that we'll get a bill for Build Back Better that would include a ton of incentives for climate change and include some universal pre-K, but not as much of the child tax credit as Biden hoped for. So that's what I think is going to happen on those related issues, all of which depend on Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. People who say Joe Manchin is McConnell are crazy. We're like $5 trillion ahead of Mitch McConnell because we have those votes. So, and because we have Warnock and Ossoff. So I think a little less despair would be warranted. Questions, thoughts, and insults on these matters. I went fast because we're almost out of time.
Anybody? Yeah.
Cynthia Schick is looking at me with an evil eye. He wants that filibuster gone.
Well, I had written a question that you partially answered. I wrote, what is the best way to leverage how the Lincoln Project, where the Lincoln Project is in the context of communicating, having a toolkit of to rationally communicate the most important ideas we need to share, to get people to look at all of these problems in the way that will lean towards more democracy instead of just defaulting to checking the Republican box.
I think that's great. There's an argument out there, I just read in the Times, that hyperpartisanship makes us inaccurately view the other side. And you read every day how there's going to be a civil war and stuff. The idea that there are people who believe there was election fraud are all ready to get their .22 rifle in Ottumwa, Iowa, and charge the National Guard is crazy. And I think there is work we all need to do in terms of taking the 4 million most crazy Americans and multiplying by 15, and that's saying who's trying to defeat the Republic. I do think that there are people, not so much on Bainbridge Island, but in our midst, who aren't as enamored of the progressive and liberal agenda as we are. But I do think there is something to be said for supporting every Republican who has a voice. I was very encouraged that when Chris Christie came out the other day and said the election is over, that he survived. And I think it's agonizingly slow for us, but outside of the Lincoln Project and the Republican Accountability Project, we should find Republicans that hearten us and do things to support that. And I'll take that up further in my blog. I think it's anytime we can find a project that's a legitimate project that tries to bring Americans together, we should. And we should also watch ourselves, because in my last blog, I made an example where the Senate, Heather Cox Richardson did a piece on how low the economic input is in Republican districts. What a bunch of crap. We're the ones that are saying that people who are poor should have as much political standing as people who are rich. Why would we traffic in, the rich districts are giving away to the poor districts? That's not us. What are we thinking? So David's blog is called Our Unfinished Work. And you could email me at dsh347@gmail.com. I'll put it up, and I'll put you on the list. So at any rate, we have to watch, Cynthia, we have to watch ourselves, because sometimes we fall into little traps. Another one is the liberal media was all over. Ron Johnson wants us to kill elections in Wisconsin. Everybody watch out. He's going to overturn the election board in Wisconsin. And if you read the detail, the following people are against doing that: the Wisconsin Supreme Court, the Democratic governor, and the Republican legislature. It's things that are scary are bad enough. There's a ton of things that are scary. Let's not make up further things to scare ourselves with. It's already hard to sleep at night. Let's show a little bit more care in our progressive activity.
Agreed.
Camilla Japhill's a great example of that.
Yeah.
He could be over there screaming at Manchin for being a son of a bitch, and she's saying, let's go back to the core agreement, build back better, and let's see what we can get done.
Mm. Yeah.
Just quickly on the COVID, there's another misstep. If you had been interviewed in October, whether you would like, especially the test in December, if you were seeing relatives, we could have predicted that a combination of a sweeping new variant, the Omicron, and people wanting to travel would create a huge demand for self-testing. Yet we got into December where everybody's weeping outside of Walgreens trying to get a self-test. That's a misstep. If we're going to run as the party that cured and licked COVID, let's not make unforced errors and have a big debate over 5 days versus 10 days. The whole reason why Rochelle Walensky wants it to be 5 days that you quarantine is they're trying to keep airlines running and schools open and hospitals open. So let's not get ourselves into being 600 million tests short. That was a mistake, and it's too bad because it weakens our ability to make the COVID claims that we have to make. We have to be better than that. And we will be. You notice how fast they moved to, we're going to send you 500 million free tests in January. They recovered nicely. And luckily, the other side is such a bunch of crazy, maniacal anti-vaxxers that they're giving us all sorts of room to run on celebrating our COVID management.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's now 12:15. Let's go for questions and thoughts on any of these three lines. So the first line, as you know, is what's now happening with regard to January 6th is a positive thing for our side. The second, we're not going to get an overturning of the filibuster. It probably should want it, but we're right to be concerned about the Gilbane argument that they're screwing up the right to vote in America as much as they can get away with. It's not as widespread as it's commonly thought, but it's plenty widespread in states that we would like to win. Unfortunately, the way that we can do something about that is win in those states. Like if there's a big Republican primary, Greg Abbott against the world, if that could create enough dissension, the next governor of Texas would be Beto O'Rourke. That would be a wonderful thing. And that's not impossible. Remember, he got 48% against that jerk Ted Cruz. So it's not out of the question that we could win the governorship of Texas. We had it years ago, and there's a major increase in Latino votes in Texas. So that could happen. That would be how to fix Texas once and for all. Same in Florida. It's not at all clear that DeSantis is going to be reelected. So fix that, and then when legislatures, if they're Republicans, pass suppression bills, then the governor vetoes it.
Right. Any comments, any questions?
Next time we talk, I will talk more slowly.
No, that's okay. I think that the COVID thing you were talking about, running out of tests, it was like, wow, How did that happen? I mean, we even went to Amazon and we couldn't find them. I also heard that there were a lot of people and the stores allowed them to hoard them like they did
Yeah.
toilet paper during this.
Yeah,
And so
you
there
can-
people were hoarding,
People have
buying.
20 tests and you're lucky if you have 2. So I think that happens. And,
Yeah, yeah.
but I do think there's something about anticipation, and somewhere in the United States government, there's someone who was predicting things on October 1st. And if we had been with them, we would have told them. that there would be a
Exactly.
huge demand. It's a misstep, but I think Walensky's good. I think this will be behind us. Notice the things that get behind us, like you would have thought that awful situation in Afghanistan would be on the public's mind every day. And there are problems in Afghanistan, quite directly. The right of a girl to get education is huge and being violated. But I think it's pretty clear that Joe Biden is not going to suffer electorally because he got us out of Afghanistan.
Oh, no. No. And Afghanistan's doing horribly right now. So,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah,
And
the
we have,
Taliban's not living up to their promises.
well, they don't remember we froze the money. So
I know.
a lot of the issue is the circumstances under which we will free the Afghan government's resources. And we're in those talks right now. I
Right.
feel better this time than I did 2-3 weeks ago or last month when we talked. I never thought that our goose was cooked for next November. As you know, the Senate races that are up favor us a bit. That is, you can see us winning the seats in Pennsylvania and Ohio, or defending it in some other places. But I would like to win North Carolina. I would like Val Demings to win in Florida. And I think all those things remain possible. But it goes back to what we've been saying during this call. We've got to bring Trump to justice. The economy's got to continue to grow. We've got to fix COVID. And then in June or July, we'll be walking down Winslow Way and we'll recognize Sheila Kerwin because she won't have a mask on. That would be
That's wild.
I know, I never see her anymore because,
she'll be eating a Mora ice cream cone on Winslow Way. It's a true story.
Tom.
Okay, Tom.
I just want to say, you mentioned about Bainbridge Island, and I came out here from Ohio 20 years ago, and I got to tell you, this is the promised land for Democrats. It
wasn't
not
always
this
that way.
in Ohio, believe me. I talked to a friend the other day, a woman who had been a county recorder. She's retired now, older, and she said, Tom, I was shopping. She said, I order my groceries, then I drive and pick them up. But today I had to go into the store. She said there were 3 people in the whole store with masks. She had one and 2 other people. It's a different world when you get out of here.
Yeah, and of course, we were just in Michigan a couple months ago, up north where my sister lives. They don't mask. Troy, Ohio, where my sister-in-law lives, but in Kalamazoo, where we went, there's the mask. So it depends. If anything that's happened to us the last couple of years, it's inexplicable, maybe even more inexplicable than Trump winning in 2016. It's the fact that 40 million people are denying that almost 1 million people are dead. That is amazing. You are 17 times more likely to be hospitalized if you're not vaccinated. You think that would kind of find its way into people's psyche. And every day you read the paper and some anti-vaxxer has died, including State Senator Doug Erickson. So it's amazing that has happened. But as Tom says, don't judge the temperature of the country by the temperature of political temperature on Bainbridge Island. Remember, it wasn't always that way. When we moved here in '86, it was a split island in terms of politics, but also remember, that was Dan Emmons's Republican Party. And And that makes it a little different. The Republican Party has moved away from the Republican Party. There'd be a lot more Republicans on Bainbridge Island if it was when the Civil Rights Act was passed in '63. It got more Republican votes in the U.S. Senate than Democratic votes, and when the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act were passed, it was Republicans. When I lobbied in Washington in the late '80s, the leader on the Superfund was a Republican. I worked for a Republican governor, Bill Milliken. These are not today's Republicans. Republicanism used to stand for fiscal conservatism and moderation on what government could do, and now it stands for crazy, crazy stuff. So hopefully that will change over time.
Oh, we can
Cynthia,
hope.
sure.
Yeah, just one other one that just is so hard for me to even think about is that it goes to the people that don't believe in that COVID's real. You said that our memory is so short, like Afghanistan as an example. How long do you think people are going to remember the big lie? How long will it take us for that to no longer be something that influences how people behave and decide? I know that's
Well, on first, we don't know how much it's influencing. I mean, it could mean that they're less likely to vote this fall if they believe the big lie. That would be good.
yeah.
It'd be bad for America, but good for our chances. I think it's not erased till after the presidential. It'll diminish, and there'll be lots of Republicans campaigning in 2022 who don't want to talk about it. But in terms of it being incredibly diminished, I think after the presidential election of 2024.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting to see how many Republicans did not go to the Vigil yesterday. You know,
Well,
they just
remember, somebody's taking names.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, you just think, well, if I was a senator, I would be courageous. But you think, poor, what's his name in Yakima, Dan Newhouse,
Mhm.
who chose to be offended by the insurrection and to the point of voting for the impeachment of the president. I mean, that pretty much strung him up by his toes, as they have Jamie Herrera Butler. So there isn't, if you're a Republican, there are consequences, and there would be consequences even for going to the Vigil. It is ironic to see Dick Cheney, who
That
made
was
up a
amazing.
war.
That was surreal.
He made up a war, so
I
we should
know.
be annoyed with him for that. But there he is, and there's two Republicans on the floor with the moment of silence, and it's Dick Cheney and his daughter. Notice also Karl Rove did an op-ed, and he said, if the Democrats did the same thing on January 6th that the Republicans did, Republicans would be outraged and would take action. So that last little bush wing is being helpful to us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we should be outraged. I don't know. I just think it was terrible. I mean, and they were saying that the Democrats were using it as a political stunt to commemorate.
Look at that.
I mean,
that-
come on.
That whore, Lindsey Graham, I'm sorry, the bizarre Lindsey Graham, who has been a dear friend of Joe Biden's for 30 years,
Yeah.
and Biden made his speech to deflect from a failed presidency. The chances that Lindsey Graham believes that are zero,
Mhm.
0.000, maybe even minus numbers. I just hate that when you get to look for electeds who say what's in their heart and what's in their mind. Lately, Klobuchar comes to mind. She's just a straight talking woman. I like that.
She was amazing. I saw her on Colbert the other night, and she was just, I mean, wow, you listen to her and it's like, folks, we have to make sure that we remember democracy is a team sport tag. We're all it. We have to activate and
No.
really, if we want to
It
keep
goes
it.
to Cynthia Schick's question because we won by 7 million votes because we're the largest political movement in American history. And I detect a little weariness. So maybe what Biden and Garland said the other day, will re-energize. I mean, there are many. Valdemix has 180,000 small contributors from across the country. So some people are paying attention, but we definitely need to get those indivisible cells and
Yeah.
organizing circles and postcard writers and callers back in action. Common Power, which is David Dobke's effort in Seattle, is still recruiting people to do work in the States and still hoping that they will be sending teams into the field. So that's an option for people who are thinking about such things.
Yes.
And there's
Indivisible
several-
starting their up their postcard writing again too. So
Yeah. So the thing with postcard writing campaigns is making sure you pick a good sponsor who knows how to
exactly.
select the addresses.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anyway, it's good to see all you folks. And let's do it again. And let's expect that by early February, we'll have seen progress on several of these fronts.